And yeah, so I'm going to be presenting selfish mining under general stochastic rewards. This is joint work with Miriam and Matt. And special shout out to my parents who made it to the talk. This is the first time they've seen me talk in person, so it should be fun. Right, so to kick us off, I'm just going to start with a little motivation. There'll be two kind of empirical motivational examples that will try and convince you of the following statement, which is that incentives of consensus mechanisms can depend heavily on exogenous events. And each of them will have, I guess, a different exogenous event, but will have like really large impacts on the incentives of that consensus mechanism. And secondly, selfish mining, where miners seek to earn disproportionately high rewards, should account for that, right? So I guess if we're saying that we're trying to model the system of this consensus mechanism, we need to account for the fact that some rewards could come from outside the mechanism itself. So the first empirical example we have is the launch of Babylon. So Babylon launched in August of 2024. And as you can see in the red circled boxes, the fees paid for these Bitcoin blocks jumped from 0.3 to 15 Bitcoin within 4 blocks. So kind of over this very short time horizon, there was a 500 times increase in the amount of fees generated for the blocks. And importantly, the block reward during this period was only 3.125 Bitcoin. So kind of at the 15 Bitcoin transaction fee block, the block reward was only like 1/5 the size of the transaction fees. So clearly, like if you're modeling the block reward as the only incentive in this game, then that's missing out on something very like large that could motivate the miners to try to do a different strategy to capture that 15 Bitcoin block. And actually, very funny timing. So today, literally, October 9th, David Shea is giving a talk on integrating Bitcoin with the DeFi economy. And so I guess this is further evidence that moving forward, there will be MEV kind of exploited and captured in the Bitcoin blockchain. It's kind of a matter of time before that matures and plays out. But yeah, so this is kind of good timing for this talk too. Right, the second example is from Ethereum. And this event happened in 2023, where an Ethereum validator exploited MEV software to extract $20 million worth of assets from trading bots. And you might say, okay, whatever, like hacks happen all the time, $20 million here or there, doesn't matter. But the interesting thing about this, and why I'm calling it out in the motivation of this paper, is because the attack was enabled by participating in the Ethereum consensus. So the attacker was a validator. They signed 2 conflicting blocks. They proposed 2 conflicting blocks, and they were slashed 1 ETH. That was the penalty. And so if you're looking at this just myopically from the consensus mechanism, you're saying, okay, they misbehaved and they were punished for that misbehavior. But clearly, if you look at the application layer, which is the list of transactions shown there, they kind of ran away with thousands of ETH. So this 1 ETH penalty like clearly does not fully capture the full view of the incentives playing out and motivating this attack. So just kind of closing the loop on this motivation, incentives of consensus mechanisms can depend heavily on exogenous events, but the selfish mining literature has largely focused on the block reward regime. So I guess this literature started in 2013 with A.L. Serrer, and they showed that selfish miners can earn disproportionately high block rewards. But this is kind of only considering the fixed block rewards, and you can, I guess, launch this attack where you selectively withhold and strategically time when you publish your blocks. This attack was generalized in a number of ways, I guess, notably by Saperishstein et al. In 2016, who found optimal selfish mining strategies, and many other papers that looked at other consensus protocols, but again, focused on maximizing endogenous rewards. And endogenous just means these are the rewards that are kind of put out by the consensus mechanism to get people to participate in a certain way. There are a few notable exceptions being papers that don't only look at endogenous rewards. So Carlson et al. In 2016 showed that selfish mining is still profitable when only considering transaction fees. And transaction fees are very different than block rewards because they're kind of a byproduct of people actually interacting with the chain. Like if I want to send Guillermo Bitcoin, I include a transaction fee. That's very different from new Bitcoin getting created kind of out of thin air. So this paper was the first to say, actually under like a pretty simple model of transaction fees, this selfish behavior where you withhold blocks strategically is still profitable. Also, Zur et al. From 2023 showed that whale transactions, and they characterize as those that pay kind of these exorbitantly high fees. So I guess calling back to the original example in Babylon where they paid 15 Bitcoin just to get included in that block, these types of transactions can also lower profitability thresholds. But kind of on net, This is quoting from a SOK paper about selfish mining. We find that only 3 works include transaction fees in their modeling. 2 consider both block rewards and transaction fees. And so kind of there may have been 100 or 200 papers written about selfish mining, but only a very, very small set of them actually look at things beyond the endogenous rewards. So this brings us to our contributions. On a very practical level, we analyze selfish mining under reward functions encompassing 3 things: block rewards, transaction fees, and MEV. So kind of the 3 things we've discussed so far, we're able to roll them up into one very kind of specific reward function, and we're able to calculate selfish mining profitability and thresholds under that. And this kind of answers the very pragmatic question of how vulnerable is proof of work to selfish mining under combined rewards. And further, it paints a much more unified picture between the thresholds of previous work. So I guess if you look at Saperishtin et al. From 2016, they have a threshold of alpha equals 3.29. And I guess alpha here represents some amount of power that the attacker has in the protocol. Here it's like the hash power they have in the mining protocol. And that's very different from the alpha equals 0.7 result from Carlston et al. So our paper kind of shows that if you kind of measure both of these things together, you interpolate smoothly between them in a way that kind of fills this gap that was in the literature for a long time. Right, and I guess maybe more interesting than the practical contributions is the fact that in order to perform this analysis, we had to develop a more general framework. And the framework has a few pieces that we view as contributions. On the modeling front, we characterize properties of reward functions and perform case studies demonstrating how the properties arise under different assumptions. So I guess we'll kind of go through one of these case studies with transaction fees later on. But the point is we spend a lot of time, like a lot of expository space in the paper, just describing why these properties are potentially interesting when you're thinking about reward functions generally in these consensus mechanisms. And second, we provide a methodology for calculating expected attacker profits under general stochastic reward functions. So the claim here is that if you use this methodology, we kind of provide a turnkey solution for if you bring a reward function that has some properties that will kind of go through, that you can use that methodology to plug and play and calculate the thresholds and corresponding attacker profitabilities. And this talk is mainly going to focus on the modeling contributions, and we'll kind of conclude with a flavor of the methodological and practical results, but I encourage you to check out the paper for more there. Cool. So jumping into the model, we study the Nakamoto consensus game, which is a stylized model trying to capture how proof of work miners behave and the rewards that they receive for participation in this game. And this is a very standard model, and I guess it plays out exactly as you'd expect. There's a set of miners M, and at each time, each miner has a few things. They have a public view. A public view is just the set of blocks that they have seen broadcast by other players, right? So Bitcoin uses this longest chain fork choice rule, but there's also many, many other blocks that they could consider mining on. And the important thing here is that miners can choose any block from the past to mine on. They also have a private view. And importantly, the private view is a superset of the public view. And the private view might have some set of blocks that the attacker has mined, but chooses not to publish, right? So this is very, very much how selfish mining withholds blocks. We're going to study a similar thing where the attacker can withhold blocks strategically. And each round, every miner picks a block to mine on. And again, all of this has been standard up to this point. Here's kind of where our model starts to deviate. The winning miner can publish their block and update the public view or keep it private. That's standard. But now this decision factors in exogenous rewards. And we'll kind of show how that evolves. And additionally, because these rewards are time dependent, we have to explicitly model difficulty adjustment. So one kind of interesting thing about the selfish mining literature historically is it didn't have to model difficulty adjustment because you're only trying to optimize kind of the end game percentage of rewards you have once the difficulty has adjusted. But since ours is like explicitly talking about time and how time evolves and how rewards accrue over time, we have to kind of capture this more precisely in the model. Cool. Now I'm going to talk specifically about a few reward function examples because I've been talking about general stochastic rewards. Hopefully this helps like make them a little more concrete. So yeah, miners make decisions about how to mine based on the rewards of various blocks. And block rewards are constant at 3.125 Bitcoin. So this is one thing that changes over time. but it only changes once every 4 years, right? So kind of within the time horizon that we're interested in, you should think of block rewards as constant per block. So no matter who produced a block, no matter which block that block is a child of, et cetera, it's still 3.125 Bitcoin reward. Transaction fees can be modeled as linear in time since the parent block. So if you're mining a block at time t, you can just, or on the parent block B, you can just take the difference between the current time and the timestamp of the parent block and treat that as the like amount of transaction fees that have arrived linear in time. And we'll show other models of transaction fees that are potentially like more interesting, but in Carlson et al., this is kind of the simple model that they used. Whale transactions are modeled as the result of a Bernoulli trial. So you could just say with some probability, the reward is very high, otherwise it's 0. And this is kind of a natural way of capturing some like rare event that is worth a lot of money if it happens during the block that you create. And the takeaway here is that our model is general enough to capture all of these and more. So like we characterize these as a set of rewards, but provide the framework to kind of extend it very naturally. Right, so the most general version of the reward definition isn't enough to kind of be tractable. So we have to add a few pieces of structure that make it something that we can actually model explicitly. And the first one that I'm going to talk about is this property of static rewards. And static rewards are interesting because they only depend on the time since the parent block. So a little more formally, a reward function is static if for all delta greater than 0. So this is kind of all of the time scales that you're interested in, the time since the parent block delta, all times T1, T2, and parent blocks B1 and B2. So you can think of this as I'm mining at a time T1 or T2 on a corresponding parent block. If the delta is the same between my block and the parent block, then the probability distribution of the reward function should be the same. So this is kind of saying if you take 2 blocks in time, their parent blocks are kind of the same distance from the current block that I'm mining, then the reward distribution of those 2 blocks should be identically distributed. And the interesting fact here is that we can rewrite static reward functions purely as a function of delta. But kind of more importantly, static rewards can still be random, and they can still be nonlinear in delta. So I guess the most basic version of transaction fees that I described before would just say the static reward is exactly delta. But you could have a nonlinear and random function of delta, and that would still be static and still be capturable in our model. So to kind of double click on static rewards as a property of transaction fees, I'm going to walk through a few cases in which transaction fees are static, and then show how different assumptions can lead transaction fees to not be static, to kind of explain why this property might be of interest and why it might apply to other reward sources. So if transaction fees arrive at a constant rate, meaning there's no contention. So I guess you can think of this as like the base case where the chain is mostly not overutilized, and people can like send transaction fees and get them included in a very predictable way. And the blocks are fully claiming, meaning there's enough space in the block to include almost all of the transactions, generally speaking. Then transaction fees are static. And the intuition here is that because the blocks are fully claiming, every child block that is built kind of includes all of the set of transactions that have arrived in the time since the parent block. And it doesn't matter when the parent block came in time, because of the fact that there's no transactions left in the mempool and the blocks are fully claiming. So that's kind of why transaction fees are static under this model. If transaction fees arrive at different rates during different hours of the day or different times of the day, then they're not static. And the intuition here is that if you're building a block at midnight versus midday, rewards may be accruing faster at midday because people are willing to pay higher fees during that time period than they would at midnight. So that's kind of this property that you have different times when the blocks are being mined and different reward distributions that correspond to those different times. Additionally, if blocks are finite capacity and transactions are patient, meaning transactions like stay around in the mempool, then transaction fees are also not static. And the intuition here is that if a parent block leaves like, let's say 1 Bitcoin worth of transaction fees for the child block to claim, then it kind of starts at a head start compared to another block that has 0 transaction fees to start their reward function generation. So I guess the intuition is that, if in order for these things to be identically distributed across time and across parent blocks, you need the parent blocks to be fully claiming. So I guess this is just one example of the properties. We do kind of explore other properties. One of them that might be of interest to this crowd is that some rewards kind of appear and then disappear. So this is something we describe as being persistent. You could think of an arbitrage opportunity that kind of becomes available if the price on a centralized exchange moves up, but then disappears if the price moves back to the original value. And so there's kind of a lot of exposition done in the paper exploring the lever reward function and how that plays out over time, but didn't have time to cover it here. Cool. So I'm going to cruise through this part because I'm running a little low on time. But on the methodology front, yeah, we do something pretty similar to A.L. Sarir and Carlson et al., which is we use a Markov chain to model the Nakamoto consensus game. And there's this beta cutoff parameter that we'll go over. And each state in this Markov chain indicates how much longer the attacker chain is than the canonical chain. So the skeleton of the Markov chain looks something like this, where at state 1, we're saying the attacker's private chain is 1 longer than the canonical head of the chain that's in public view. And the attacker gains a lead +1 with probability alpha each time. And the honest parties mine with probability 1 minus alpha and correspondingly move the state in the negative direction. But this is all kind of very standard. The interesting bit is focusing onto the 0 to 1 transition. And so the 0 to 1 transition is kind of when the miner is making this decision of should I hide the first block that I found that I'm mining on the head of the public chain. I found a block, should I publish it or not? And that function is where the probability in that decision is what depends on our static reward function. So there's a few pieces here. We're integrating over time. And so the left part is the PEF of the exponential. So this is pretty straightforward. The lambda parameter there is actually kind of calculated using the difficulty adjustment algorithm that we described before. But more interesting is the second term of the integrand, which is the CDF of the rewards. And the CDF of the rewards basically says at a given time t, what is the probability that my reward function is greater than or less than a certain threshold value? And the intuition here is that if the rewards are high enough, if they're greater than beta, then you actually want to publish immediately because this block is valuable. You don't want to risk losing it. But if it's less than beta, then you're kind of it's worth it to hide to try and get into like a selfish mining state that is likely to result in a longer fork for you. So this is kind of the area that is of interest because in order to write out this Markov chain, in order for this to be a Markov chain, we need this function to be identically distributed over time because we calculate the stationary distribution of this to calculate the expected rewards. So that's kind of the key unlock in the methodology. And filling in the rest of the chain looks like this. And I have like a minute and a half left, so I'm going to go quickly here, but just a brief picture of the results. So this plot shows as a function of alpha, what percentage of what proportion of the rewards do you earn? So I guess honest miners would earn exactly alpha rewards, meaning they kind of are rewarded proportionally to the work they put in. And if you look at the inset axis, we're combining a few things here. We combine the two most basic reward functions, which is the block rewards from A.L. Sarir and linear transaction fees from Carlson et al. And the selfish mining isn't profitable, only looking at block rewards until alpha is greater than 1/3. And this is kind of interesting because other reward functions become profitable much, much earlier. So I guess if you're trying to assess the risk of the protocol, it changes a lot depending on which of these reward functions you look at. And that kind of leads us to the final slide, which is the profitability thresholds. So this is exactly kind of that same question, which is at what value of gamma, which is kind of a network connectivity parameter for the attacker, at what value of gamma does this attack become profitable for the attacker? And the different reward functions yield extremely different assessments of protocol vulnerability. And I guess if you look just at the green, which is the block rewards, things look relatively safe. If you look at red, which is just the linear rewards, things look pretty unsafe because across the board, the threshold at which this selfish mining strategy becomes profitable is very, very low. But of course, as you'd expect, the combined thing is somewhere in between. And again, our methodology is useful because it allows you to, if you have strong opinions about what the reward function looks like, it allows you to express those rewards and calculate these thresholds directly. So thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you, Mike. We have time for a very, very brief question. All right.
Can you go back 2 slides?
Yeah.
Are you using the same reward formulation for all of these baselines?
Yeah, so I guess this is a good question because the selfish mining block rewards one depends on kind of after the difficulty adjusts. Yeah, so if that's what you're asking, then yes, we do account for the fact that we kind of have to look at rewards after the difficulty has adjusted and you've reached the new equilibrium rate of producing blocks.
That's why it's still 1/3.
Say again.
That's why the threshold.
Yeah, that's why it's still 1/3. Yeah, exactly. Thanks,
Thank you,
Julia.
Mike.
Yep.
Cool. Thank you all. One more applause for Mike.